insurgents, many backed by foreign interests, have just been eliminated in Burkina Faso's deadliest counterattack yet. But this isn't just about insurgents hiding in the bush. Something bigger is moving behind the scenes. Who's funding this chaos? Why is Burkina Faso the battleground? And while the West says Burkina Faso is weak, how did it manage to eliminate insurgents? Let's find out. When you hear Burkina Faso, what comes to mind? Probably not insurgent cells, satellite phones, and foreign manufactured rifles. And yet, over the past few years, this quiet West African nation has become one of the most strategically saturated conflict zones on the planet. Not because of what it has, but because of what it represents: resistance. It's not oil that drew the vultures here. It's something more threatening to powerful global actors, a government that refuses to kneel. Since 2015, Burkina Faso has been swarmed by armed groups claiming allegiance to insurgent groups. These aren't scattered warlords playing tribal politics. These are well-connected transnational militias moving with military precision. They cross borders effortlessly. They communicate using encrypted Western apps. They show up with weapons too advanced for desert raiders and too organized to be freelance bandits. So, how did this happen? The answer lies in the vacuum left behind by foreign interference, and ironically, in the footprints of the very countries claiming to fight insurgency. After years of so-called peacekeeping efforts by international coalitions, particularly the French-led Operation Barkhane, militant violence in the region didn't shrink. It exploded. The more counterinsurgency missions were launched, the more insurgent strongholds seemed to pop up. And where were these insurgents coming from? From Mali, from Niger, from the very conflict corridors where foreign forces had once dropped humanitarian aid with one hand and drone strikes with the other. When those same forces began to be expelled, when Mali, then Burkina Faso, started kicking out Western militaries and diplomats, a strange pattern followed. The violence didn't just increase randomly, it became more surgical, more vicious, and, most notably, more focused on undermining new leadership. In Burkina Faso's case, that meant attacking the legitimacy of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's government. Coincidence or consequence? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Let's be clear. Insurgency in the Sahel has always been a dangerous reality. But what's unfolding now is something else, something deeper. These aren't ragtag insurgents chasing ideology. Many are tools of destabilization, knowingly or unknowingly used to pressure governments that reject external control. Think about it. Who benefits from chaos in a country like Burkina Faso? Not the farmers, not the villagers, not the children walking 20 kilometers to school, but foreign mining companies who want cheap gold, arms dealers looking for markets, and governments that fear a rising Africa that stops begging for aid. And make no mistake, Burkina Faso is rich, not in the flashy oil reserve sense, but in strategic gold mines, in untapped energy, in agricultural capacity, and, perhaps most dangerously to the West, in a growing appetite for sovereignty. That's the real threat. What better way to stunt that momentum than by flooding the nation with conflict? It creates humanitarian headlines. It opens the door to urgent intervention. It exhausts local leadership. And most of all, it gives cover to proxy actors and shadow forces who want Burkina Faso to be weak, divided, and dependent. But here's where it gets darker. Intelligence sources inside the region have long warned about foreign entities arming and financing moderate rebel groups, only to see those same rebels morph into insurgents. It's the same old trick used in the Middle East. Train a militia to counter an enemy, then act surprised when that militia turns into an army of insurgency. Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, now the cycle repeats in the Sahel. Burkina Faso, however, isn't following the script. Unlike other states that welcomed foreign troops and signed away their autonomy in the name of stability, Traoré's Burkina Faso is calling the bluff. They're not asking for airstrikes, they're asking questions. Why are we being targeted? Who are these fighters? Why are they better equipped than our army? And who continues to fund them while our people go hungry? And that's exactly why the pressure is rising. Burkina Faso isn't just under attack by insurgents, it's being punished for thinking independently. The insurgents are pawns, yes, but pawns still carry knives, and with the West no longer controlling the board, those knives are being used to bleed out an entire nation before its revolution can fully bloom. So when Traoré launched his counteroffensive and neutralized hundreds of militants, it wasn't just a military win, it was a message, a declaration that Burkina Faso knows what game is being played, and it's no longer playing along. But if Traoré is cutting off the insurgents' limbs, the next question is, who's feeding the heart of this chaos? And how deep does the betrayal go? In a region choked by foreign military bases, NGO flags, and debt agreements written in languages most locals don't speak, Captain Ibrahim Traore didn't rise. He erupted, and not from a palace or an elite academy. He came from the front lines, from the barracks, from the dust-covered trenches where real soldiers bury friends, not politics. His emergence wasn't polished or planned. It was urgent, angry, and rooted in the exhaustion of watching his country bleed while outsiders wrote the script. Burkina Faso didn't choose a career politician. It didn't need a statesman in a suit. It needed a shield, a hammer, someone who wouldn't just manage chaos, but would dare to dismantle the machine creating it. Traoré became that man. When he took power in 2022 at just 34, the world media barely took him seriously. A young captain, they said dismissively, as if age disqualified resistance. But they didn't understand. This wasn't a political project. It was a liberation movement in uniform. While the West called him a military strongman, thousands of Burkinabe citizens saw something else. A leader who listened. A leader who didn't smile for cameras in Brussels but sat on the ground in war-ravaged villages, hearing stories the world ignored. And the moment he walked into power, he broke the pattern. The old formula was clear. Crisis erupts, West offers help, Western troops arrive, resources get secured, nothing improves. Under that model, Burkina Faso remained unstable, yet permanently under care. A patient was never allowed to leave the ICU. But Traoré unplugged the machines. His first major move? Ending military cooperation with France. No hesitation, no negotiation, just a clean break. After nearly a decade of ineffective foreign intervention, Traoré said what most African leaders whispered behind closed doors: "You're not here to protect us, you're here to protect your interests." And with that, French troops packed up and left, stunned, humiliated, and furious. The ripple effect was instant. Intelligence networks were severed, training programs halted, aid packages paused, Western media narratives sharpened overnight. Suddenly, Traoré wasn't a reformer. He was a threat to democracy. But democracy had never stopped bullets in Burkina Faso. It never protected villagers from insurgents or gave soldiers proper boots. It had only created governments that looked stable from the outside while rotting within. Traoré's second move was even more controversial, inviting Russian military instructors into the fold. It wasn't just about strategy. It was about signaling that Burkina Faso would choose its partners. This wasn't about ideology. Traoré wasn't joining some Cold War cosplay. He was making a statement. If the West won't respect our sovereignty, we'll find someone who will. Russian instructors weren't coming in with a colonial past, a long list of IMF conditions, or veiled threats. They were coming in with military pragmatism. Traoré made it clear Burkina Faso's dignity would no longer be traded for aid money or false security. But with these decisions came risk. The pullout of French forces left a vacuum, and those who had once operated under France's watchful eye didn't simply disappear. They regrouped, rebranded, rearmed, and what followed was a surge in surgical attacks on government officials, infrastructure, and villages seen as loyal to the new regime. It wasn't random. It was a punishment. Still, Traoré didn't back down. He reinforced local militias, improved supply lines to frontline troops, and launched aggressive offensives into areas where the enemy had long been allowed to dig in. Within months, hundreds of insurgents had been captured or killed, including some whose affiliations pointed to foreign sponsorship, raising questions about the international dimension of Burkina Faso's unrest. And while Western critics called his methods extreme, many Africans saw clarity in action. After years of watching leaders talk while their countries burned, Here was someone who didn't ask for permission to defend his people. But this created a new kind of enemy, not one with a gun, but one with influence. Whispers began to circulate. Discontent inside the military, shady meetings. The word coup started surfacing in telegram channels and encrypted calls. After all, what's the best way to stop a rising leader who refuses to be owned? You turn his soldiers against him. And that leads us to the next unraveling chapter in this war. Not on the battlefield, but in the heart of the military itself. A betrayal so deep it nearly broke the revolution from within. When a revolution threatens too many powerful people, bullets become less effective than betrayal. In early 2025, as Burkina Faso's military reclaimed villages and dismantled insurgent cells, a far more dangerous threat was forming. Not in the forests, not in insurgent camps, but inside the very army that was supposed to protect the nation. And while the world focused on battlefield reports, propaganda stories, and drone footage of burned-out trucks, a small group of insiders was working quietly to undo everything Ibrahim Traore had built. They didn't need to win the war. They just needed to open the gate from within. The plan was audacious and almost worked. A network of disgruntled soldiers, mid-ranking officers and intelligence defectors began coordinating with known insurgent factions, some of whom had recently lost key territory and resources to the national army. These weren't ideological radicals. They were strategic traitors, blending in with loyalty while secretly scheming to bring down the leadership they once saluted. The most disturbing part? Their goals were not merely political power or revenge, but realignment, not with Russia, not with the Burkina Faso people. But back to the old order, back to the same foreign handlers Traore had kicked out. It wasn't just a coup attempt, it was a counter-revolution. The operation was scheduled to unfold in stages. First, isolate Traore politically. Rumors were seeded across WhatsApp groups and private forums, painting him as paranoid, corrupt, even mentally unstable. Next, destabilize frontline morale by spreading disinformation about desertions, imaginary defeats, and alleged Russian interference. Then, trigger simultaneous unrest in the capital, divert attention from the military, flood the streets with fear. Finally, the knife in the back. A faction inside the armed forces would stage an internal mutiny, seize the presidential residence, and immediately call for international stabilization. The goal? Return Burkina Faso to a democratic order with a Western-approved transitional council. But the plan failed, and not because it was sloppy. It failed because Traore knew it was coming. According to multiple security sources, intercepted communications between some soldiers and known insurgent commanders set off quiet alarms weeks before the coup was launched. The language wasn't vague. Names were mentioned, coordinates discussed, and in a few messages, foreign consular codes appeared, the kind only used in encrypted exchanges with state-level actors. Rather than respond with dramatic arrests or public purges, Traore let the plot develop, just enough to identify everyone involved. Then, in one decisive sweep, the network was neutralized. Arrests were made. Hidden stashes of arms and foreign cash were discovered in urban safe houses. And by the time the news broke, the coup had already been crushed in silence. But the fallout didn't end with handcuffs. What the investigation revealed shook even hardened loyalists. The plotters weren't just working with insurgents. They were working with foreign intermediaries connected to intelligence operations in neighboring countries. These actors had been keeping a close eye on Burkina Faso's internal changes, and now, with traditional influence lost, they were seeking a way back in. By force, if necessary. This moment was a turning point for the Traore government. The realization was clear. Not every enemy wears a turban or chants insurgent slogans. Some wear national uniforms. Some speak fluent French. Some hold diplomatic passports. In the aftermath, Traore tightened command structures and launched an internal audit of the military's chain of loyalty. Units were restructured. High-ranking officials with unexplained assets were dismissed quietly. A new layer of community-based intelligence was deployed. Trusted civilians embedded within villages to report suspicious military behavior. It was the birth of a people-powered security model that no foreign blueprint could replicate. But the scars remained. The coup attempt, though failed, left behind a sobering lesson. Sovereignty doesn't collapse through invasions. It collapses through infiltration. And for Burkina Faso, that meant a permanent war on two fronts. One against insurgents in the bush, the other against double agents in the shadows. Yet perhaps the most dangerous battlefield of all wasn't the forest or the army barracks. It was the delicate space between survival and suspicion, especially when ethnic tensions are weaponized and civilians begin to look like combatants. And that's exactly where the next front would emerge, in the villages, among the people, where distinguishing friend from foe became nearly impossible. So what happens when war reaches your doorstep and you're asked to choose a side with a gun to your head? In every war, there comes a point where the front lines blur. And in Burkina Faso, that blur begins in the villages. After foiling a military coup tied to insurgents and foreign handlers, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's government found itself in a new kind of battlefield, one not marked by territory, but by identity. And nowhere was that battlefield more volatile than in the Fulani communities scattered across the country's north and east. The Fulani, also known as the Pool, are a nomadic ethnic group that stretches across West Africa, from Senegal to Nigeria. In Burkina Faso, they number in the millions. Traditionally, cattle herders, traders, and semi-settled farmers, the Fulani, are not new to conflict zones. But in recent years, they've become the most misunderstood and most dangerously stereotyped group in the counterinsurgent war. Here's why. A growing number of insurgent cells operating in Burkina Faso recruit heavily from Fulani populations. The reasons are complex: poverty, marginalization, lack of education, and the erosion of traditional livelihoods due to climate change and land disputes have made many young Fulani men vulnerable to radical narratives. Jihadist leaders, often also Fulani, exploit these fractures, offering money, protection, and a warped sense of purpose in return for loyalty. But instead of separating the insurgent recruiters from the innocent majority, some within the Burkina security apparatus have fallen into a devastating logic. Fulani are insurgent. This is where the war takes its ugliest turn. On one hand, it's undeniable that some Fulani have joined insurgent groups. There have been cases where entire villages were complicit, offering food, shelter, and information to insurgents in exchange for protection. In these areas, the line between civilian and combatant has genuinely blurred. And when soldiers lose comrades to IEDs planted on dirt roads outside these same communities, the thirst for vengeance grows harder to contain. But on the other hand, the vast majority of Fulani are innocent, trapped between insurgent coercion and military suspicion. And each mistaken raid, each mass burial, only strengthens the insurgents' recruitment narrative. It becomes easy for insurgent preachers to say, "Look how they treat your people. Look what your country has become. We are your only protection." This isn't just tragic, it's strategic. The weaponization of ethnicity isn't a side effect of war, it's a tool. And many believe it's a deliberate one, designed to fracture national unity and make true independence impossible. After all, a divided Burkina Faso is far easier to manipulate than a united one. The more Fulani are alienated, the more recruits insurgent groups obtain, and the longer the conflict drags on. Perfect conditions for outside forces to reinsert themselves under the guise of peacekeeping or mediation. And yet something remarkable is happening. In defiance of this pattern, local leaders from Fulani communities have begun speaking out, not against the military, but against the insurgents exploiting their name. Elders are holding peace dialogues, organizing defense groups loyal to the state, and even assisting in the identification of foreign-trained operatives embedded among them. Some Fulani fighters who once joined insurgent groups have returned to the government under reintegration programs, offering critical intelligence in exchange for amnesty. This is what the international media often ignores. Burkina Faso isn't descending into ethnic war. It's clawing its way out of one, trying to build a new model of unity under fire. It's a balancing act few countries can survive, let alone win. But Traoré's administration seems committed to a future where being Fulani doesn't mean being feared. Still, this will require more than statements. It will require trust. And trust can only grow in the absence of betrayal. But what happens when betrayal isn't just ethnic or political, but hidden inside global narratives and power structures that claim to protect, yet constantly destabilize? That's where we go next. The deeper you dig into the crisis in Burkina Faso, the clearer the pattern becomes. This isn't just a war against insurgents. It's a war against a nation trying to stand on its own feet. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré's forces moved decisively through Fulani-majority areas, they were accused of targeting civilians. When they raided insurgent strongholds, they were called violators of human rights. When they dismantled a foreign-backed coup, they were painted as authoritarian. But ask yourself, why is a country fighting back suddenly the one on trial? The answer lies not in what Burkina Faso is doing wrong, but in what it's doing right, at least by African standards of sovereignty. Let's be blunt. Traoré's government has refused to be a client state. It rejected French military presence, exposed the limits of Western peacekeeping missions, turned to non-Western alliances, and began channeling its resources toward domestic industrial revival, not export pipelines to Europe. This wasn't supposed to happen, not here, not in the heart of the former French Empire. And so every move Burkina Faso makes is scrutinized, distorted, and repackaged as a democratic concern. But look closely, and you'll find that the real concern isn't democracy, it's disruption. Traoré's refusal to play by the colonial rulebook threatens not just French influence, but the carefully maintained illusion that African nations can't govern themselves without foreign guidance. This is why, in the global media narrative, fighting insurgency becomes secondary to restoring democracy, a convenient phrase that has justified coups, sanctions, invasions, and occupations from Iraq to Haiti. And Burkina Faso may be next on that list. But unlike those nations, Traoré and his allies are preemptively rewriting the playbook. They've joined forces with Mali and Niger in the alliance of Sahel states AES, a bold trilateral defense pact that rejects neo-colonial meddling and prioritizes regional autonomy. Together, they're building intelligence networks, sharing border security resources, and uniting on policies that prioritize local governance over foreign dictate. It's not just an alliance, it's an African firewall against recolonization, and it's working, slowly but surely. Insurgent groups that once moved easily across Sahelian borders are now being cornered. Key transit routes once used to smuggle arms and gold are being cut off. And most importantly, public morale in many rural areas is shifting from fear to defiance. This is the part no international briefing covers, when villagers begin refusing insurgent demands because they believe their government, for once, might protect them. Of course, this progress is fragile. The economic pressure is immense. Burkina Faso's break from the West has come with sanctions, financial isolation, and media warfare. Every decision Traoré makes is followed by warnings from global think tanks and sharp-tongued opinion columns in European newspapers. Aid organizations have reduced funding. Humanitarian access has been reevaluated. The World Bank has paused certain development packages, citing institutional concerns. But all of this reveals one unsettling truth. In the eyes of global power structures, insurgency is tolerable. Independence is not. If a leader cooperates with Western forces and fails to stop insurgent attacks, he's doing his best. But if he dares to defend his people without permission from Washington or Paris, suddenly, he's a warlord. Burkina Faso's situation proves that the fight against insurgency is being used as a smokescreen, a flexible excuse that either grants you favor or earns you punishment depending on who your allies are. That's why Traoré's government is treated more harshly for killing insurgents than others are for hosting them unknowingly. Because this isn't about morality, it's about control. Yet despite the odds, Burkina Faso is not folding. Instead of foreign dependency, it's investing in local military production. Instead of IMF loans, it's partnering with new global players offering deals without strings. And instead of appeasing critics, it's building a new political culture where the army, civilians, and traditional leaders co-govern in survival mode. It's messy, it's raw, and it's entirely African. And maybe that's what scares the world the most, that a small, landlocked nation defying all expectations could teach others to do the same. Because if Burkina Faso can fight insurgents, resist coups, navigate ethnic tensions, survive sanctions, and still chart its path, then what excuse do other nations have? This is more than a regional crisis. It's a political revolution hiding in plain sight. And now, the world must decide, will it support African independence or continue to attack it under the banner of fighting insurgency? Do you think Traoré will be able to fight insurgency alone? Should Africans step up? Let us know in the comment section, what can you do to save your country? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.